Brazil's government is facing a violent backlash after trying to crack down on illegal gold mining in the Amazon. A task force burned about 30 boats near a protected forest reserve. 2 days later, protesters torched environmental officers. But the question of who's in the wrong here isn't so cut and dry. Officials accuse the miners of decimating parts of the Amazon and polluting the rivers. And the gold miners, they say they've been denied licenses for years, while major corporations are easily granted permission. Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now in the studio by Ambassador Paulo França. He's Brazil's Consul General here in Istanbul. And Vinicius Mariano de Carvalho. He's a professor at the Brazil Institute at King's College London. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Paulo França, good to have you back on the show. It's interesting because we're not talking about the hard politics in Brasilia today. But this is fascinating because you have the army and the police on the one hand, you have illegal miners on the other, you have indigenous peoples being caught in the middle. Is it a worrying situation?
It is, but at the same time, it's something that the government is dealing with a lot of care and a lot of determination, because illegal gold mining has a number of negative implications as far as health is concerned, as far as the deterioration of the environment, as well for the lives and for the culture of the Kayapós Indians, who were the ones that were, in fact, subject to this latest event.
They say the illegal miners, the garimpeiros, or I don't know if I'm saying it right, but they say that they can't get licenses. So the mining companies easily get licenses to operate, but they cannot if you're a small player, which then pushes them to do illegal gold mining. Is there some truth to that?
No, I don't think so. I think that legal mining has spread out as something which is very negative. As I said before, the way they enter into land which is protected, the way they use the land, the way they pollute the environment, has showed to the Brazilian government that we have to act.
Right.
We have to act with a very determined way, with the cooperation of all the agencies involved.
Right.
Environment, National Indian Foundation, police, the army, all the key players to curb this kind of operation, which is illegal.
Vinicius, the Environmental Protection Agency's buildings being set on fire, so this is no joke. I mean, it's getting increasingly violent. Thousands of people have protested as well. Who do you blame for the current impasse?
It's not a simple question to answer. You cannot blame directly one or other side of the situation. Mining in the Amazon is historically a very complex issue involving many actors, as you mentioned before. We have here indigenous people, we have here the local population, we have here the presence of the state as agent to manage this environment, this area. What is also a complex area, considering the location, considering all the conditions around. The question is, as I mentioned before, the illegal mining in the Amazon, the garimpeiros, the presence of garimpeiros, and the violence connected to it, it's very historical in Brazil. And I agree with the ambassador that just said that it's important that the government act firmly in order to tackle the situation as this one that just happened here, to assure the presence of the state, the sovereignty of the state over this area and over the miners that we have in all this part of Brazil. Also to assure the security of the population living there, especially the indigenous people that share a large part of this territory as their reserves. So it's not so easy to say who to blame about that. We need to take into consideration the several actors that are involved on it, but again, reaffirming the sovereignty of the state, of the federal government over these areas, and assuring that when and if mining will arrive, it will be under the surveillance of the state and under the rules of the state.
Yes, Vinicius, given what they're mining for is a prized commodity, and also that there's so much violence that springs from it. Some people are calling illegal gold mining the new cocaine of Latin America. Is that accurate?
Illegal gold mining had waves in Brazil, basically. We should remember, for example, the end of the 80s when we had a massive illegal gold mining in a region called Serra Pelada in Brazil. Of course, that's a sort of dream of become rich quite easy and quickly, especially considering how easy it is to extract gold in the Amazon. A massive migration happened that has serious consequences for the environment, for the distribution of land in the Amazonian areas. It is a process of making very easily somebody rich. But we should remember, differently from the coca that's based on plantation, gold it is a resource that disappears very soon when we have systematic exploitation of it. So if we don't manage that quite carefully and precise, what we can have is a massive internal migration, lots of crime and illegal acts associated with that, and consequently destruction of the nature, and just after a very short period, a region completely impoverished because of the end of this resource. Right.
Ambassador França, this flared up again in the summer, and the timing is interesting because it happened not long after President Michel Temer signed this decree. There was about 46,000 square miles of protected areas that he opened up to commercial mining. They then walked it back and said, actually, this is protected area. But did he make that initial mistake by setting the machine in motion, by declaring commercial mining open on protected land? Was that a big political mistake?
No, I don't think it was a political mistake. I think that what happened was that in Brazil, as you know, we underwent a very strong crisis, which was deeply damaged the accounts of the country, the economy, and we are facing it, and we have to work on it. So the president is trying to bring back investors and creating a good environment for investors to the country. In this framework, he thought of this possibility. But of course, you know, there has to be a debate in Brazil, and there was a debate, and he listened to this debate and how to move forward. The question here is, the illegal miners have been doing this for a number of years, are degrading the environment, are intruding in indigenous land, and creating a number of difficulties. And there the government has to act in a very strong and determined way. Mm-hmm. As Vinicius Mariano said, and I agree totally with him, it's not a very easy subject. It's very complex. Nowadays, there is an investigation going on. As you rightly said, on the 24th, there was this operation done by IBAMA, FUNAI, and other agencies to destroy a number of equipments that were being used by the illegal gold miners. And in retaliation to that, they set fire to agencies in the city of Humaitá. So these are people that are doing criminal acts, and they have to be curbed. In this regard, the government is doing a thorough investigation. And one thing which is very important in this regard is the fact that the servants, the civil servants in those two agencies were threatened.
But I'll tell you what's interesting here is that thousands of protesters are backing the miners. Tell me why. If what they did was so wrong, right, the illegal mining, right, they have their boats and they try to get the gold out of the sludge, right, in the rivers and so on. And the government cracks down on that. They burn down government buildings. That's really wrong. But why are so many people backing them? Tell me why.
Well, because at the end, in that area, which is very poor, of course, whenever there is an inflow of resources, it's welcome. But at the same time, you have, as Vinicius Mariano rightly pointed out, to be very, very, very cautious. There has to be an investigation, and these people have to understand as well that what is being done is wrong. We talked about very briefly of the consequences of this illegal gold mining. They use mercury, quicksilver. This is highly polluting. It creates a number of difficulties and a number of very negative consequences for health. Just to give you an idea, in that area of the Amazon, the main source of animal protein is fish. If the rivers are polluted, you have the risk of these people being as well contaminated by this kind of substance.
Right.
So we have to be very careful. The government is being very careful. It is investigating, but at the same time, it has to act with determination to curb this kind of thing.
Yeah, and just a sort of side note, it's very difficult to confirm whether illegal miners have massacred previously uncontacted tribes. We're getting reports of that, and then there's some pushback saying this might not be true in the Javari Valley, so we'll have to watch that closely, but that would be a worrying development if true. Vinicius, how would you recommend the government acts in trying to find that balance? You have Ambassador França saying the government has to be very careful here. There's a lot of things to balance. On the one hand, sure, gold mining, it'll be good for the economy, legally, commercially, and so on. On the other hand, protecting the environment in a time when the climate is tenuous, and also protecting indigenous people who just want to be left alone. How does it do all of those things at the same time and fight illegal miners in that process?
This is a good question and a hard one to answer. As it is a complex subject, I think the most important point here is to listen to many actors that are involved in this question. It's not a question that the government can decide by its own, but indigenous people must be involved in this decision-making, as well as people that are living in this region and need to find a way of surviving. I agree with Ambassador França that this position of the government, it must be well-balanced to prevent the assassination of indigenous people by illegal miners, and also to preserve the environment, to preserve the nature in this region. It's important to remember that mining, it's a very expensive activity when well done, when properly done, and can convert very easily in a really disaster to the environment. So an increment of the fiscalization of companies or even individuals that are mining, it's very important. The regulation of the mining process, which areas can be used for mining or not, the preservation and protection of the indigenous areas and the reserves for environmental issues also must be assured. As well as the intensification of the presence of the states in this region. It's good to remember Humaitá, it is very, very isolated area in the heart of the Amazon, not far from Rondônia state. It's not so easy to connect to other parts of Brazil. The presence of the state there must be more efficient in prevent violent reactions as these one.
But Vinicius, when you say the intensification of the state presence, right, and when I mentioned to Paulo França earlier on that thousands of people had protested on behalf of the miners, he said, yeah, of course, if you're a poor villager and there's a cash bonanza and these illegal miners start to give you nice things now out of the blue, you might support them. Doesn't that tell you that perhaps if you have more of a state presence, particularly when it comes to police and military, they will be treated as an outside occupying force if the people's hearts are not with you?
Well, state presence should not be seen only as police and armed forces, but also must be understood as the presence of healthcare, education, infrastructure construction. So if those populations are not seen integrated into the main picture of the country as producers, as citizens, will be easier a way to confront that with the state. But if they feel integrated and part of a system that's called the state, we will not have here a problem. So I think, of course, the presence of the police and the armed force to prevent and really to fight the illegal and the criminal mining in this region. It's important, but other agents or other agencies of the state must be present too in order to assure that the entire community will be integrated into the country.
Good to see Paulo França nodding in agreement here. So I won't ask you if you agree, because I know you agree. Unfortunately, I've got to move on, but I'm really grateful that we've had this conversation, because the story hasn't been in the headlines. And I'm glad to get both your thoughts on this issue in the Amazon. Paulo França and Vinicius Mariano de Carvalho, I thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers.